This week on the Road to Cinema podcast, Oscar-winning production designers David Wasco and Sandy Wasco, as we explore their careers working on such films as La La Land, which won them the Oscars for production design this year, as well as Wes Anderson on films such as Bottle Rocket, Rushmore, and the Royal Tenenbaums, Quentin Tarantino on Pulp Fiction, Reservoir Dogs, and Jackie Brown and their new film Molly's Game, written and directed by Aaron Sorkin and starring Jessica Chastain. We'll delve into the role a production designer plays in making a film, the collaboration between a production designer and director, as well as the other members of the crew. For more information on the Road to Cinema podcast, please visit jogroadproductions.com. You can follow us on Twitter at JogRoad, Instagram at JogRoad Productions, like our Jog Road Productions Facebook page. Don't forget to subscribe to Jog Road Productions on YouTube to watch some of our video interviews with Don Cheadle, Ewan McGregor, Greta Gerwig, and many more. You can subscribe to the Road to Cinema podcast on Apple Podcasts and Stitcher for the latest episode downloaded every week. And don't forget to write us a nice review on the iTunes, Apple Podcast page for the Road to Cinema podcast. And now we join Oscar-winning production designers David Wasco and Sandy Wasco as we explore some of their amazing films, including La La Land, The Royal Tenenbaums, Pulp Fiction, and many more. I thought we could start off by talking a little bit about what your process is going into a movie. You're hired, you're coming in, you know what the screenplay is. What's that first step you take?
Well, first of all, I'm David Wasco, and we have Sandy Wasco here. We work as a team together, and we are basically designers for movies. And what we do is we're hired to help create the look of a movie. And the blueprint that we work with is a screenplay or a script. And our career has sort of been built on script-driven movies that we carefully search out and end up then connecting with directors, and sometimes then do a string of projects that are with the same director. But what we're in charge of is helping figure out what the movie looks like, and it involves everything from picking locations to working with the camera department or working with the costume designer. Essentially, everything that the camera films has to be procured, thought about, pulled together, and then set up. And it's usually a mix of practical locations and then sets that are built on a soundstage. So we're usually the first people that are hired. We're really considered a below-the-line craft department, and it's usually a locations department which would work together with us, and it's usually really just us with the director, and we meet with the director and we discuss what they want to do with their story. And often, and we've been very lucky to work with a director that is usually a writer-director. So they're usually the people that it's their words. They wrote the story, and then they're going to direct it. And that was the case with our most recent movie, which is Molly's Game. It's written by Aaron Sorkin. This is his first time he's directing. We worked with Damien Chazelle on La La Land, and he wrote that screenplay. We've worked with Martin McDonagh, who is a big UK playwright, and he directed In Bruges, and then we did his first US movie called Seven Psychopaths. And pretty much right down the line, Rampart, which was Oren Moverman. He's a great writer, director. Quentin Tarantino, we've done virtually all of his movies up to Django. Django and Hateful Eight were done. We did not do, but we've done every movie that he's directed from Reservoir Dogs. You want to hide this, or I don't know what you're doing. Dave Mamet, Red Belt. So in any event,
It was also interesting you've worked on the first films of directors. So it was Bottle Rocket, that was Wes Anderson's very first film, Reservoir Dogs, Quentin Tarantino's very first film. What is the experience of working with a first-time director versus someone who's had more of that experience?
It's a great thing over a career, too, to have worked with young directors at the beginning of our career so that we were all sort of learning together. We had we had backgrounds in film, more in design than film, but then getting the chance to start when they were learning the process as well as we were, it was a great collaborative effort to move forward with them. And at the beginning, working with, the first thing we do as a design team is break down that script. So to have the director, the actual writer and director there to speak with us directly about every bit of dialogue and every bit of action in the script is unbelievably helpful.
With Wes Anderson, who is known so much for his visual design, you were there from the very beginning. So what were some of the ideas that he had that you were able to sort of mesh together and make your own in a sense?
Well, I think in terms of working with Wes, we had the first three of his movies, starting with Bottle Rocket, then Rushmore, and then Royal Tenenbaums. So I think we were instrumental in helping him find his voice, or if that's a visual voice, if that's a way to describe it. He then continued with doing these very specific, visually thought out projects that I feel are almost stronger visually than they are story-wise. I think that when we had Wes for Bottle Rocket, they ended up doing a 10-minute short that went to Sundance, and I guess caught the eye of Jim Brooks and Polly Platt, producers, and they're the ones that then jump-started it to become a feature film. So we met Wes. Wes and Owen came on the set of Pulp Fiction while we were working with Quentin as guests of Quentin, and they asked me at the time if I was interested in doing a movie with them, and we said sure, let's read the script, and we loved the script. So
that script too took place in a town that Wes knew really well. So early on, he showed us pictures of some locations that he had chosen already or were inspiration to him when he was thinking about places that these great characters would run around and do their action in. And that informed us a little bit as to what we were going to be doing for design, because the colors were very strong. The design elements in a place, say even a diner, something very simple. The graphics were interesting. The stuffed fish on the wall was interesting. So we could take a lot of information from that and then mix it, of course, with the humor and the story. And having looked at the short that he delivered to Sundance, there was a lot of information there for us to pull from. He also wanted it to look a little bit like the French New Wave. So he wanted us to limit the color palette to these sort of reds, blacks, and minimal colors. Right. Turned out to be brighter. There was lots of yellows and blues and things like that. But so those were sort of the beginnings. And then as we went into the other stories, the later films,
Rushmore,
Wes did wonderful drawings,
kind of stick figure drawings,
of his storyboards, and they were really informative because when items that maybe he drew or suggested in the script were actually finally developed when we were purchasing or building them and run by them, they would be carefully looked at and carefully commented on by Wes. But so the process started really early with his drawings and his script, and then would proceed right through filming.
Well, each three movie from Bottle Rocket to Rushmore to Royal Tenenbaums became increasingly more visually controlled and minutia. There was nothing that was not thought about, from very small prop items to big room environments to the vehicles, and then ending up with Royal Tenenbaums, which was taking kind of an off-kilter look at New York City. We shot it all in New York City, but it was kind of an otherworldly New York. We changed the design of the street signs. The license plates were original design. He kind of masked the fact that we were in New York, but we were in New York. And we shot it.
It was fascinating seeing the apartment or the home that they live in.
Yeah.
Because I believe that was actually a real home that was built
That was
out.
a real house. It was in
Yeah.
Harlem. And that was kind of used as a practical location where we filmed on every floor of the house, and including the rooftop where we created a falcon nest for the Richie Tannenbaum. So it was a derelict house that we had to kind of make safe for filming, and then we painted everything, and then we used a few other locations in the neighborhood that functioned as other rooms. There was a ballroom in the house that was in a different building. There was a backyard that was kind of a Japanese garden that was at a neighbor's house. So we really kind of took over the community and shot up there. We were really, I know there was nothing else going on at the time. I think President Clinton was just getting an office up there. So Harlem wasn't the big thing that it is now, the place to go. It was an interesting building designed by this Dutch architect, Adolf Hoek, H-O-K.
Yeah, they compared to Bottle Rocket, that was a little more grounded in reality. The stories progressively develop these sort of West worlds that are these wonderful places that are sort of like you kind of think, well, New York, you kind of know it's New York. And then later with Budapest, the title, we didn't work on that, but it suggests a place, but it still is a magical version of these worlds that he's speaking about, writing about.
And the detail with the
the
wardrobe,
detail.
the sets, everything is
Yep.
very, very specific to each character. So you're
Yes.
almost like, even within this fantastic world, it's even more specific,
Yes.
delving into each individual character in a way.
Yeah, that was wonderful. That was wonderful to do for
Yeah, and
Rush.
in a way, catching these directors like a Wes or like Quentin early on, and I guess this sort of size budget of the movies, they were sort of left to do their own thing, which allowed us to sort of really find and shape their vision. And it was the same with Reservoir Dogs with Quentin. They weren't big studio movies, although even in the case with Bottle Rocket, it was a studio movie, but it was still a kind of a micro-budget studio movie. And although Jim Brooks was the producer, he was not hands-on. He actually had Polly Platt, who is a mentor of ours. She's a production designer that did a lot of the Larry McMurtry movies like Last Picture Show, Pretty Baby. She's an immensely talented production designer that was married to Peter Bogdanovich, and she was the producer. And I was a little intimidated about working with her, but she really just let us do our thing, and we were able to talk about stuff. But it became a very relaxed environment to work. And she, again, protected Wes. And I'd have to say the same about Quentin. He was really, even though he was unknown for Reservoir Dogs, we really just protected and carried out his script and his words and let him steer the show.
Yeah. Well, looking at Pulp Fiction, which is a big transition from Reservoir Dogs, many more sets, many more characters, very sprawling. How much of that was in the script versus what you had to go out and independently design?
Yeah.
Well, with Pulp Fiction, pretty much everything that you see in the finished movie is what Quentin writes, and we really stick with the words. And I know that that's the case with a lot of the writer-directors, is that that's the one thing that you do not change, is their words, their rhythm of words, the blocking that is sort of created by the words and the amount of dialogue that has to happen in a room or in a hallway or whatever. But Pulp Fiction was, again, Reservoir Dogs was a relatively big indie hit, and then there was the thought, okay, what's Quentin going to do next, and can he top that? And then this comes and it kind of explodes on the market and becomes this. It was really kind of a groundbreaking indie movie that hit a lot of firsts. I think it was the first to make so much money. But we would have the script, which is the blueprint, and for instance, Jack Rabbit Slim's, which was this fictional nightclub. There's a paragraph description of the club, but then Quentin would give us a few movie references that he wanted us to look at. He wanted us to look at Howard Hawks' Red Line 7000, which I think is James Caan's first movie, and he said there's a race car drivers club in this movie. He wanted us to look at that. And then he wanted us to look at Elvis Presley's Speedway, which had another club that they hung out at that had like a slot car track. So we were able to lift some ideas from these movies and then put them into the club.
Well, we kind of watched the movies and then kind of ramped it way up. I mean, we took a lot of Los Angeles icons, the old drive-in architecture of the Googie designs of the time, and did that big sort of cantilevered roof structure that goes out over the dance floor. And then we had just been out to, we'd been inspired a lot by the architecture out in Palm Springs. A lot of the
Albert Frey. We had worked on in between Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction. We ended up working on another production designer, architect, Craig Hodgetts, was working on this museum exhibit down at MoCA downtown in Japantown. It's called the Case Study House exhibit, and he hired us because it involved building 3 full-size mid-century case study houses that were kind of groundbreaking in Southern California post-Second World War. And then we orchestrated building them inside the museum, and then we functioned as decorators to dress the houses per the period when they were built. So we kind of had this vernacular in our mind. We were fresh off of working on this kind of mid-century world that we had a lot of fun with, and then we jumped right into Pulp Fiction. So we had that in our mind, and that kind of drove the design for the Jack Rabbit Slims. And Quentin did specifically say he wanted us to be frugal with a lot of the other sets, and then to kind of put our budget and focus into doing this nightclub set. So I guess then after the movie came out, it became a rather big thing where tourists were coming to Los Angeles and inquiring where this restaurant was because they wanted to visit it. So much so that Disney, which was the parent company, had contacted us and asked if we could help do a Jack Rabbit Slim set for the Disney Orlando. It never materialized or never happened, but it became a big thing. So it is funny how when you do something in a movie and it becomes such a big thing in real world.
Well, that's interesting because now with La La Land, there's actually a tour you can take to visit all of the La La Land locations.
There's a tour you can actually look at, and you can go onto the studio backlot.
It's great over at
where we
were there when the tour went through the studio backlot, and of course all the kids get off the bus and start dancing. Yeah. It's really great.
Yeah. But when a movie strikes a note, and it's funny because I still feel that what our job is I kind of still try to remain background, and I look at my job as helping the director and the actors do their job so that they can do their job well, and to provide them with, whether it be a prop in their hand or a specific car that they're driving, or a room or an office or a house that they're in. It's kind of just do it so that it doesn't overshadow the script, which or the director's work or the actor's work. You're just helping them do their job. So in a case, for instance, with La La Land, when it becomes a recognized thing, it's really quite wonderful. But traditionally, I really like to remain background, and it is a collaboration where you have all of these different craft people that are assembled together, and it's a rather large group of people to do even a small budget movie. But you have, the camera department, the costume department, the prop department, the casting department, the actors. There's so many people, and when it all gels and works, it is magic. And it's a funny thing, because making movies hasn't changed really that much from the early days of when movie making first started. Of course, there are these tools that we now have that are essentially tools that help that help, but it's still an old-fashioned craft where we go into these studios and things that are really old-fashioned. And I mean, where we did like the backlot at Warner Brothers, where we did La La Land, it's really old-fashioned and wonderful. When all of this kind of works together and it works, it's like when you're baking a cake or something and it comes out fantastic. It is magical, and it is quite wonderful. But I don't think there's any real rhyme or reason to, this is the formula to make a successful La La Land. It's so hard. I do have to say that to have a Damien Chazelle is really the key thing, and we had that with Quentin. He's the real deal. Wes is also. These are really
they're scripts
smart
with
people.
Great characters.
Yeah.
Scripts with great characters, and they found great actors in all of them too. It was really.
But it is very interesting. It is still an old-fashioned craft.
Mm-hmm.
What is the difference for you between working and developing a set on a soundstage from scratch versus going into a real location and molding that to what you need it to be?
I still prefer to work in practical locations, and regardless of the budget, and even and approach it that way, where we try to find a location practical first, meaning it's a real building or a real house or whatever. And if that then becomes limiting, where if there are too many pages of dialogue, or the crew, with even on a small budget movie, if the crew is hampered by being out in the elements at a practical location, then we offer to build it as a set to make it an easier for the film to function. Essentially, what you're doing is you're giving the director more time to be with the actors. I'll give as an example the movie that's coming out in a few weeks, Molly's Game, which is Aaron Sorkin. It's very straightforward. It's really not an art direction movie, but it's a movie based on a book, on a real person that took place in Los Angeles and New York City. And for budgetary reasons, we were sent to Toronto to do the entire movie in Toronto. So it was the art department's job to then find things that looked like they were houses that were in West Hollywood, or the interior of a club that was on Sunset Strip, or then when the movie moves to New York City, Manhattan, we needed a federal courtroom where it becomes essentially a court. Many pages in a big, intimidating courtroom. We ended up finding the courtrooms to shoot this portion of Molly's Game, the Sorkin movie, but they were either too small or we had access on a weekend and we'd have to break up the scenes. So we ended up building the courtroom. So in the movie, you don't even say, oh my gosh, this is a really big set that the art department did. You don't know it. It just is like they go into this federal courtroom and that's where the later part of the movie takes place. So we provided that as a place to help Aaron direct the movie and the actors do their thing so that they didn't get to these emotional scenes where they're doing their job and then they have to cut and take and then we have to go to another location to do something else and then come back to this location. So that's, I think there's a degree of reality that I like to have in a movie. Like some of my favorite movies are just practical locations, like the in theaters now. We did not do the Florida Project, and it's practical locations, and I think that's quite wonderful. I respect and like when art departments have to do these completely created magical worlds, like some of the fantastical movies, like the remake of Blade Runner, which is quite wonderful. And that's really not any practical locations. It's all.
I think two places that we really spent a long time looking for the locations and eventually built them were in Kill Bill, Bill's Hacienda, which could have been a Spanish. We looked at a lot of large Spanish houses in the desert here, and then in Mexico, and then the theater that had to burn, the French theater in Inglourious Basterds. We really exhausted reality, which was kind of silly in the end because having to burn it down was kind of something.
Well, just to.
And then later we built all these things,
Yeah,
but we did look for practical locations.
Yeah,
for
to
all
add
those.
to Sandy's point about Inglourious Basterds, we, having done a string of projects with Quentin and sort of knowing how he liked working in practical locations, he actually did like practical locations, and we approached Inglourious Basterds, which had a very, very short prep period, 10 weeks from the minute that we were sent to Berlin to day one of filming. We found most everything practical, including the opening scene French farmhouse. We found fantastic locations. And when Quentin arrived after us presenting these practical locations, he just had kind of an interest in taking advantage of Babelsberg Studio, which was this wonderful old studio that was created as a propaganda studio, I guess, prior to the Second World War.
I think even prior to needing it for propaganda.
Yeah, it was a very old studio in Potsdam, Germany. So he wanted to build certain things. So we did. We also had, and an answer to your question, if there's mechanics of a set that like fire, where you have to be most concerned with safety, then that has to be built as a set. And we actually found the theater, which would have been several theaters for Inglourious Basterds, but because there had to be so much fire and then an explosion where the marquee had to explode and all of this, it made sense to make it practical. So make it a set. So we built that all as a set.
And sometimes you have to go through all these steps just to reassure the company that you're not wasting their money.
I'm a big safety guy too, as far as our job is so, as I said before, there's so many people involved and there's so much going on that sometimes there are accidents where whether it be an actor or a crew person, somebody gets hurt, and often it's something that's related to something that the art department is either built or created or did. So it's something that has to be built into how we're figuring things out is safety, is crew safety. And I'm just using fire as one example, but we had big scenes with fire in the auditorium where we had hundreds of people, actors and stunt people that were just surrounded by fire, and nobody was hurt. And it was because we planned it out and we're very careful with it.
Yeah. Well, also too with destroying a set for a scene like that, you probably can only do it once. So
and
you take all this time building it, and then it's gone.
Built for 3 burns. It was like double sheetrock. So you can get 3 burns, and then after each burn compromises even sheetrock, which is plaster, and that's compromised more and more, and then it gets to a point where it becomes too dangerous, where the walls can topple over.
Yeah.
And
the chairs are rebuilt, and it was just an odd small thing, but it's impossible to find velvet curtains or velvet in that yardage that wasn't fire treated. And it burns badly. If something's fire treated, it sort of drips and it doesn't go up in flames. Yeah. So to get it milled so that it was untreated prior to our using it, so that it would actually burn up to the ceiling and cause this effect,
a big trend
step.
Now in what we do is interfacing visual effects with the art department, and often it's sort of almost like one department now. I again sort of like to focus on scripts that are more reality based and less magical, and even the magic that happened in La La Land was sort of low tech, and the magic that happened in the Wes Anderson movies was very low tech, analog almost. But a lot of the new movies or the bigger budget things that I'm mentioning are interfacing with what we do, art direction and visual effects, to help tell the story.
Mm-hmm. When you think about La La Land, for example, the opening scene with the cars and the big dance number, and I believe there was only a very short amount of time that could be filmed.
2 days.
It was that was again analog. It was we actually had control over the transition ramp from the 105 to the 110, which was 100 feet in the air, and we had rehearsed the scene. We had a kind of a very low tech studio environment that was just in warehouses in the little town of Atwater, where our production office and then our construction was. But we were able to rehearse putting the autos in kind of an arc that resembled the arc of the on-ramp, and the rehearsals then helped, and then we had a prior weekend where we were able to actually stage the vehicles on the on-ramp. We own the on-ramp, and do a rehearsal, and then when we came back the following weekend, we were able to do it. And it was it looked like one continuous camera move, but I believe that there were 3 cuts in it. But it was still the real world things that made it difficult were it was a very, very hot day. I think it was over 100 degrees, and the safety, which I'll bring up again. My concerns were that there was a very low parapet wall on either side of the elevated ramp, and you had all of these actors and dancers that could easily back up and fall off, and it was a sheer 100-foot drop right down to concrete.
Were any of the dancers on wires?
Nobody was on wires. Everybody was completely. They were all, for the most part, real dancers. So they really knew what they were doing, and again, what we did, and I'm repeating myself in saying that we will provide things to help the actors do their thing, where we procured all the cars. We were able to reinforce the roofs of the cars because there was a lot of jumping on the tops of the cars. Then we created these kind of steps that allowed the actors to. It looked like they just hopped over the waist high divider, medium, or whatever you want to call that. So there were little things, and then we changed the striping on the white striping on the ground But for the most part, it was really just an on-ramp, and we didn't really we didn't change it in any other way. So so it was really the dancing and the camera work that did the magic there.
Yep.
And the only CGI I think we did do, because we had a dance number in the Griffith Park Observatory, the planetarium has been modernized, so Damien wanted us to kind of bring it back to how it looked when it was used in Rebel Without a Cause. It was a much more deco design. So we built that as a set also to allow them to do wire work where they were able to lift the actors and have them float up into the air. So we built a full-size planetarium.
Wow, that's interesting. The whole interior of the planetarium was built.
That was all built, and then
not the entrance where they pass the Tesla and dance.
Oh, but just where the actual inside.
Just when they go into
into where it's the projected star backdrop.
Yeah.
So we were kindly allowed to go into the Griffith Park Observatory, and the foyer where they did their dance. That was all a practical location. That we were asked to not really touch anything. We brought some lighting, we brought a few elements, but for the most part, the Tesla coil, all of that was practical. And then when they enter into the planetarium, that was then a built set that went up about 12 feet in height, and then after the top of that set became a green screen that allowed them to put sort of a starry backdrop.
The finale of the movie is absolutely spectacular, and reading certain interviews with Damien Chazelle, he talked about the influence of a lot of the 1950s musicals and also Umbrellas of Cherbourg.
Yeah.
How did that play into designing that finale?
I would have to say that really La La Land was so heavily and carefully thought out with Damien, and we had a bit more. It was a short prep, but then there were a few things that happened in production that delayed our principal photography. So we were able to keep designing with Damien, and he cared so much about the look of the movie that he actually felt more comfortable. As I said, we had our production offices and construction and costume department were all in this cluster of warehouses in Atwater Village. He wanted his office or his desk to be in the art department, so he spent more time with the art department than any other department. And then when the cameraman Lena Sandgren came on, we would have these meetings with costume department, Mary Zolfries, Lena Sandgren and Damien, and within the art department, and we would really just talk about everything. And he had, I would say, our biggest influence was the Jacques Demy movies, which were these very primary colored French movies that were done in the 60s. And they were mostly practical locations, but what they did was the design department painted a lot of things, these very bright, vibrant primary colors. And then they mixed in some built sets, but for the most part, they were really out in the real world. And we really took that as our cue, and that's what we did with this movie. We painted big areas. The Warner Brothers backlot, we painted the entire street. We created the coffee shop. That was all built behind a little facade. But we planned and schemed everything with Damien. Everything, we built models. It was all thought out. And the end, grand finale, was sort of this real. It was really analog, low tech. It was very almost theater sets that we built that were just hand painted backdrops. And the crossover again with us is that some of the paintings that were done, everything was all original. It was all done original paintings, but some of the sort of morphing of LA iconic landmarks, which he wanted to showcase in the grand finale, I had a concept illustrator, Carl Sprague, who actually worked. He was the art director with us on Royal Tenenbaums. So it's this very small world that's all meshed together between the Wes Anderson movies, and we took a lot of that sensibility and unfolded it into making La La Land, and then we come up with this wonderful gem of a movie. It wasn't it wasn't a big budget movie, but it was one of these things where when you have somebody like Damien that really has in his mind what he's trying to do, and he directs all these different departments, and you end up with this wonderful thing, and it's a great thing. So people often ask me, well, what is your favorite movie? And I always say, well, it's the most recent movie that I've worked on, because you take these years of doing movie after movie after movie, and you take all these ideas and all these things that you've learned and all these tricks, if you want to call them, and you put it into the most recent thing. Whether it's, like I said, Molly's Game, which I haven't even seen yet. We're to see it tomorrow night, but it's really not a design movie. But you take all these ideas and tricks and things, and you put it into making it this world. And Molly's Game is essentially a mockumentary, or it's a documentary about a real world person that did these fantastical things. La La Land was a fictional movie. It's about these fictional characters that are in this magical take on LA. I would liken that to Royal Tenenbaums, which was a magical take on New York. It was New York, but it was not quite New York, and that's what Damien wanted to do with La La Land. He had all these great ideas from early on, but one of the things that how I like to work is you keep the ideas coming, and you keep an open mind about a better idea or a better way to do something right up until you're filming it. And even while you're filming it, you might get another idea and say, hey, well, what if we did it this way? And then you do it that way. And so you don't limit the director. Some directors that we work with actually don't like storyboards because it locks them into a certain way of doing something. I know early on, Quentin never liked storyboards because it was like, well, this is how you're going to have to do it. And he didn't want that limitation. So the point that I'm saying about the success of La La Land is that we kept an open mind about really great ideas, and we kept these ideas bubbling up throughout the prep and while we were making the movie. It helped to have a phenomenal director of photography that was also, everybody had that same sensibility or way of thinking, where we were just open-minded about good ideas. But a lot of the ideas did come from Damien.
How important is it to collaborate as production designers with a cinematographer, with wardrobe, with the other departments? Because there must be a sense of how is the set going to be photographed and how will that translate in the end?
Well, it's because it's a big collaboration. Making a movie is a big collaboration. I liken it to real-world architecture, where you're building a skyscraper. It takes thousands of people to build a skyscraper, and essentially you're building a skyscraper when you're making a movie. So it's our job to kind of filter these ideas that come from the director and filter it to all these other departments, whether it be the costume department, the camera department, the prop department, so that everybody knows what the director would like to do. It helps when everybody is in an environment where you're close by and can communicate. But and that's where a lot of the contemporary tools that have become with just emailing, and I mean, our early movies were made when there were no cell phones, and there were we had pagers, and so all of these tools and being able to
you can convey your ideas quicker, and
you can get ideas, you can communicate. So it is communicating all of that so that when you get, these hundreds of dancers and everybody all in this one place, you got to figure, it's a business, and you still have to complete what you have to do in one day or 2 days, and then move on to something else. And it's our job to make sure that we're communicating that. So sometimes talking over a little white foam core model, like the finale, we actually built these small scale models that were able to sit on a conference table, and we're able to look at everything and say, okay, this is where we would start. And the set then stretched and grew and shrunk in different areas, and things moved depending on where he wanted the characters to be at different points of the dialogue and the music. And then even when we had the set built, we kept things loose and flexible. Things were hanging on wires. We had like a little orange grove that were little cutout orange grove trees. Everything was movable. It was able to kind of move around and adjust so that it made it. It didn't lock Damien into something that would not allow him to do what he wanted in his mind.
Have you ever had issues where you design a set, you build it, and then you test it to photograph it, but it doesn't translate necessarily when it's photographed versus how it is sort of built practically in a way?
I don't know. I mean,
Luckily,
that would
not
not
so
happen.
much.
It wouldn't happen if there's so much communication between everybody.
It happened a little bit in 50 Shades because the producers wanted it really gray. And the director and I had a lot more color in certain things than they want. But that's the only time I can remember. And that wasn't really, it didn't work on film. It was just a discussion that didn't work.
Yeah.
But otherwise, not so much, because you're right. It is, there's a lot to talk about. It's lucky, now we find that the DP's time is always shorter and shorter, which is awful, because to have the time with them is so important, because they have so much to do with the lighting and the colors and and what kind of lighting fixtures we're going to use and what kind of transparent fabrics you want to use. And
Yeah, everything is sort of speeded up now, and
lots of discussions.
And there's now usually a limitation of the amount of time that they will hire an art department on to prep. And like Sandy was saying, often a director of photography will come fresh off of another movie and come in just a few weeks prior to shooting. But with the case with, say, La La Land, we did have Linus for a fair amount of time. With Seven Psychopaths, working with the same, with Ben Davis, who was the cameraman, he came in right before filming. And I guess this is an answer to your question, Jeffrey, in Seven Psychopaths, which I don't think anybody has seen, but we had a house for a character, and we had everything figured out, and it blocked out, and then the director of photography came in kind of late in the game. And he said, guys, it was a house in Silver Lake. It was on a super steep hillside. He couldn't light it from the hillside, didn't provide him with any kind of a base where he can have lights from outside. So we ended up having to find a different location. So it's all like, you just roll with it and keep open-minded about things. Often also, there are things that are maybe out of everybody's hands, like in Jackie Brown, which I think is a wonderful Quentin movie, mostly all practical locations, pretty much. Is we had this, and that was a lot of locations because Quentin grew up in the South Bay, in kind of near the airport in Los Angeles, and he had these places in mind. So it was an Elmore Leonard story that was transposed from Florida. It was called Rum Punch. Transposed it from Florida, and we moved it to Los Angeles. So he wanted to use the South Bay. But we had a fantastic bar/nightclub. It was in the real world called the Cockatoo Inn. I think it was we left that same name, and it was this closed bar, motel, hotel that was from the 40s, I guess, and it was in ownership limbo with a company in China, and it was very complicated. But we had the location, and he was excited about it because it was part of his childhood that his mom used to take him there. And then we lost the location. So this was one thing where we had something, and then for reasons that was out of everybody's hands, I don't remember exactly why we lost it, and we had to search for other similar interesting locations, and then it came back to us, and we ended up using it in the movie. But it's these things where you just have to roll with everything. It's when you're making a movie, it's everything has to happen in such a short period of time. That's why things cost so much money, is that and then there are these unforeseen hassles that happen that are maybe real world hassles that when you're trying to be frugal and doing things low budget, that you just have to kind of roll with. But.
Do you remember sort of the very first projects that you both worked on, and sort of how your confidence grew over the years?
Well, we did most all of my things were working in consort together with Sandy as a set decorator, and that's really the main other person in the art department is a set decorator and a production designer. And
Well, I think in the early ones, I mean, you did El Norte before I was working with you.
Yeah.
And in the early ones, of course, they weren't union. So it was a whole different thing.
yeah, it was easier to do.
So the big difference is we did everything. I mean,
Yeah.
you painted,
smaller-
you built props,
smaller department.
There was really no one to delegate
I
to.
think
Right.
going back each generation, you end up with these smaller art departments that I don't even know how prior to me being in this business, how some of these art departments work with so few people. Like, I think some of the early things that I mentioned before, Polly Platt, who is a mentor designer, she did things with very few people, and I don't know how they did it, because it just...
I was reading about the last picture show. I think she did wardrobe and the sets and
Everything.
every detail.
What's great about that is you learn everything, which is terrific.
But-
Because you're more on set a lot, you're learning about the problems that the director and the director of photography rely on the art department to solve on these early things.
But the other thing that I'll say is that early on in our career, right around the time that we were married, I did do a few things that were just on my own without Sandy. But then Sandy started to do set decorating and actually had some pretty interesting projects that she did independent of me. Like she worked on an early Curtis Hanson movie called Hand That Rocked the Cradle, which was a pretty good Curtis Hanson who did LA Confidential. But that took her to Tacoma, Washington for almost a half year. And although I went up and visited a few times, we didn't like being apart. So we thought, why don't we just, not only are we more effective as a team together because we know what each other is thinking, that you can sort of make a better do a better job with the two of us thinking about these things together, and almost where we bring it home, and where it's not like you punch the clock and it's a 9-to-5 job, which the movie business is not, but we still will take something home and we'll be talking about things while we're at home eating dinner or something. So it was like, well, let's try working on these things together. So actually, it's almost like. Sandy did do really early on a bunch of these things where you were working on the wash.
Yeah, and so with the projects growing in scope, I mean, thank goodness you finally do have a team and do have players supporting you. So yeah.
It is interesting because thinking about yet another writer-director project El Norte, which I was very lucky to work on. I must say I've been so lucky to work with some incredible writers, but that was really seat of the pants independent filmmaking, where I think even filming all around Los Angeles, a lot of the locations were just stolen. They were not paid for.
I think any beginning art directors listening to this or decorators know that your first two projects, I mean, you're taking furniture out of your own house, you're loaning your friend's car. I mean, it's everything is seat of the pants at the beginning. And then, of course, it gets much more professional.
But I would also, my recollection was Gregory Nava is and Anna Thomas. They were a husband and wife team that directed and produced each other's things, where Anna would direct something and then Greg would direct something. But they were the real deal, just the same energy and brilliance that Quentin projected, and the same energy and brilliance that Damien Chazelle projected. And it's interesting because you can look at El Norte that was done years ago. It's a masterpiece. It's a great movie. We've been doing a lot of PR work recently because we're experiencing the 20th anniversary of Jackie Brown and the 25th anniversary of Reservoir Dogs. So we haven't looked at these movies in years, but we looked at them recently, and they're really good. And that's not always the case with a lot of movies. Like if you really go look at something from 1992, what was really great then. And
well, there's a timeless nature to Quentin's movies, to Wes's movies. I think even La La Land's going to have that too. It is timeless.
I think you'll be able to look at La La Land 10, 20, 30 years from now, and it'll stand on its own. It's funny because El Norte is very contemporary in its what it's saying right now. It's even more so than when it was made in 1983.
What are some of the benefits, I think you discussed it just now, of working together, of being a team?
Well, I think, and I always say this when I interview because it's true, but I say that you're getting two production designers. Sandy, and sometimes I have to actually go in and sell this to the art department. For instance, I had a wonderful art department. I had a package of a fantastic art director and a group of people in Toronto where we did Aaron Sorkin's movie, and I had to say, okay, guys, we're going to run it a little bit different in a sense that Sandy is going to have a little bit more of a voice than what would traditionally be allowed or that would traditionally come from a decorator. And sometimes it's hard for that to be comprehended because there's a kind of a decorum and a way of making a movie, and or a chain of command, whatever. But you are getting two designers because Sandy's my training is really not formally trained. I have wonderful friends that are designers that have gone through AFI and the production design department, and that are fantastic. I'm not formally trained, whereas Sandy is formally trained art history major and has that under her belt. So I use that, and so essentially she kind of steps in where my weak points are, and then I have an ability to interface and communicate with people that I step in and help her with that. So it's just a better thing. And also when you work together, when you're a team, whether you're a husband and wife, when you work together a lot, and some directors choose to work with some designers all the time, and they have a string of projects together, it helps that you've worked together before because you just kind of know, you almost don't have to say certain things. You just know what the other person is going to recommend and think about and suggest, and you just it just makes it better. And that's the case whether you're designing movies or whatever business you're in.
If there's ever conflict in an idea, how do you resolve that?
I usually will. Well, I'll if I really want to dig my heels in, I do that. But it's you, as I said, it's not just between me and Sandy. I often have then sort of between us there is an art director or a supervising art director, and I'm again a big collaboration fan. Like I like to have like in an art department, which is often a lot of people. I have like a open office environment where there's a kind of a bullpen area and there's open tables where I like to actually have, whenever the director will come in and we have a meeting where we can talk about stuff, I have the keys all surround and kind of listen to what we're all talking about. So everybody weighs in. So so by building the art department, I actually go and search for top to bottom really overqualified people in every position, and even I struggle to find like a fantastic production assistant or even an intern, somebody that is really, really great. And for instance, the production assistant that I had on La La Land was like having another art director, or at least an assistant art director. And I think that he actually left the show with that credit, if I'm not mistaken. But I like to say, okay, if there's the conflict, what is it? What do you guys think? What does everybody think? And then we take a vote on it, and we say, okay, you know, or for instance, like in 50 Shades of Grey, where we had this really brilliant director who is basically an artist, an amazing artist, Sam Taylor Johnson. And then we had the woman that wrote the story that was also sort of the boss producer, and they just had different ideas about things. So we would have to get two different beds, you know, one that Sam would like, and then one that Erica would like. And then we would sort of like let them haggle it out. But whatever. So, but I'm proud of that. The look of that movie too. This is the first 50 Shades of Grey, we did not do the second or the third ones.
50 Shades Darker?
Yeah, did not do those. Yeah.
After working all of these years, what still excites you about going on to a movie?
I still love interviewing, and I think that the other thing that is really great is that it's a business and an occupation where every single movie is completely, totally different, and you have and even if it's the same director, when you're working with the same director or producers that work together, you're in a different office, and our job takes us out in the field a lot, which I think is a healthy thing when you're just not under one roof all the time. You're all over the place, and I think, or you're in a different city, or you're in a different country, and I think it's a really wonderful thing, and that's what's exciting to me. But we get with the risk of sounding kind of picky or arrogant about it, we get excited when an interesting script comes our way, and it doesn't necessarily have to be like a big splashy, win the Academy Award art direction thing. If it's a really interesting story, that's what excites me. And we do read things together, and sometimes there are things that Sandy, who is a lot better read than I am, but Sandy will see something in something that maybe I don't. But I have this gut ability to, when I read something and I can see it in my mind, and I often like to do it with like the first read. And it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a director that is a big director or something, and often is not. They're not unknowns. I mean, really, before La La Land, Whiplash didn't even come out, and nobody really knew who he was. And then Whiplash kind of came out while we were prepping it, and he became a bigger thing. But that's what excites me, is just is reading, and it's analog. It's old fashioned. You get a paper script, or now it gets sent digitally, but you can read this thing that's typed out, and it's very interesting when you get. And we still try to find whoever is the person that wrote the script is going to be the person that's going to direct it, and that's not always the case. We try to shy away from these tentpole things where there's 8 different writers, and it's not of interest to us. So it's exciting to find a really good story to then think about.
And I was going to ask you about winning the Oscar for La La Land. Do you feel that that was that your proudest work in a sense, working on La La Land?
I think
we never worked for the award, so it was really wonderful to get, first just the bubble of conversation saying, "Oh, you might be up for this," and then, "Oh, you got this nudge to the next step," and it was very exciting. It's
we've
really
worked on a bunch of things where when you are working on something really pretty amazing, you can sort of sense it, and that was the case. Say with Pulp Fiction, you really knew that something was going on with that. And quite frankly, it's really weird because up until La La Land, a lot of people have thought that we already have had an Oscar, particularly for Pulp Fiction, and we have not. We did get nominated for a BAFTA for Inglourious Bastards. However, we did not win. But it wasn't something that we set out to do.
It's magical to get it for La La Land.
It was
because it's a Hollywood movie.
Yeah.
And to have that, beyond the stage, getting the statuette for a movie that it was based on a lot of films where, what am I thinking?
It was special. It was really special. Yeah. I mean, it started with. There was magic from the very beginning when. Early on in prep, I know Damien had dinner with Gene Kelly's wife, who kind of gave him her blessing to take the baton, or whatever you want to say.
I know American in Paris and Singing in the Rain. Those are big.
It was Gene Kelly's wife.
Huge. Yep.
And they had dinner 1-on-1, and she said, "Go for it," and so we didn't go, set out to win the Oscar, but it just became this really, really fantastic thing. There were actually quite a few really great movies. That it was actually a kind of a good year. There were quite a few really great movies, and things that are the kind of movies that I was mentioning before, that were kind of script-driven, interesting stories that were not bullied around by big studios and or tentpole kind of things, and that was in a way kind of neat. So it was just really great, and but it was our first experience to going through that, and it was absolutely magical and totally weird and totally surreal, and it was made even more surreal by we are asked to go up on stage, and the people that are handing us the awards were the actors from 50 Shades of Grey, who we were pretty friendly with, Dakota Johnson and Jamie Dornan, who, it was absolutely surreal and so weird. And then I must say, we were on stage when accepting the Best Picture nomination with a whole group of people, and everybody said, "Hey, wait a minute, you didn't win." We're like, "What? What's going on?" So it was it was just. I don't think people will ever forget that year. It was a weird, like a weird year. It was strange. But we're very lucky. We're very fortunate, but it's a career of a body of work that I'm proud of, and Sandy's proud of, and we're just very fortunate, and we're just very lucky.
Thanks for listening to the Road to Cinema podcast. We'll see you next time.